Hi, everyone, and welcome to Be True, my podcast about the writing I love and the writing I do. I promise I won't rhyme the whole time. I'm John Tessitore, and today we accept nothing less than literal translation from my chapbook, All the Lonely American Roads. You can find all of my work, including All the Lonely American Roads, at johntessitore.com. Every so often, after yet another mass shooting in America, I'll post a bit of today's poem on my Instagram page. I could be posting it all the time. By one count, there have been 274 mass shootings in America in 2024 as I record this episode. That's a shooting in which 4 or more people have been injured. 274 in 174 days. 100 more mass shootings than there have been days in the year. As you probably know by now, this is a particularly American epidemic. Our friends overseas don't share it, not with the same omnipresent anxiety. But at least we're consistent. We did a shitty job of responding to a global pandemic a couple of years ago, so why shouldn't we do a shitty job of handling our own public health crisis? Yes, lots of crime indicators have been on the decline in America for a while. But this particular and obviously preventable crime stat, mass gun violence, continues to plague us, and to haunt the nightmares of the parents of school-aged children across the country. I raised the issue today because it's idiot season in America. Time for another mind-numbing presidential campaign. And the gun issue brings to the fore a more general problem with American culture. A problem so insidious that it now appears to govern our political culture as well, with catastrophic results. It's right there, in the first line of this poem. We accept nothing less than literal translation. An American skeleton surfacing in the desert. Biblical, mythical, and oh so dramatic whenever a dry riverbed chokes up the dead and the land becomes retribution. Our violence laid bare in its dust, the sins of our parents, piercing the rotted corpse, marking the carcass, and cowboys in pursuit as if the trail were still hot. Of course, that crack in the sky is always a gunshot. The literal translation. It's everywhere you look. It's the hat and boot-wearing side-shooter cowboys of today's suburbs. Fellas who don't appear to realize that the Lone Rangers they copy are, and have always been, a fiction, an act of myth-making, a product of books and movies and fashion. The literal translation. It's the gun absolutists conditioned by a wealthy gun lobby to define anything that shoots a bullet as one of the arms covered by the Second Amendment, regardless of technological advance. We've never really done this for any other technological product, just guns. For example, we don't subject the automobile to the same laws that our fathers' wrote to govern the horse and buggy. But for some reason, we're okay regulating automatic weapons the way the colonials regulated muskets. The literal translation. It's a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court subscribing to a legal theory they call originalism, as if we can ever be sure of the founders' original intent, or would even want to know the founders' intent in a modern era they could not and did not envision. The literal translation. It's religious fundamentalism of all kinds. Take your pick. And here's the catch. Given our history and the way our myths were constructed and written, and how they're taught in schools and through the media, the literal translation in America almost always supports a power structure that is white and male. This is not revisionist history. It happens all the time, deliberately, with disastrous consequences. I'll give you an example. I'm a huge fan of John Steinbeck, and I once wrote a biography of him for young adult audiences. Steinbeck is best known for his Depression-era Dust Bowl work, The Grapes of Wrath most of all. Generally, these are stories of migrants from the Midwest, white Okies like the Joad family, who were forced off their land and fled to California to find work as crop pickers. That's a real story. That really happened to a lot of people, tragically. But most of the suffering crop workers of Depression-era California did not look like the Jodes. They were Mexican and Filipino. Steinbeck knew this, and he cared about their plight, but he also knew that the U.S. government, FDR's New Deal, was more likely to assist the poor if they looked like the Jodes. And so, from good intentions, Steinbeck made a deal with the devil, and the dangerous myth was born. The myth that the worthy poor of the Great Depression were white folks. If you translate that myth literally today, as we almost always do, it begins to look like evidence that there is something new about today's Mexican and South American migrants or Filipino immigrants, when in fact, they've been the basis of our economy for at least a century. So back to the poem. I wrote it a couple of years ago when a drought was drying out Lake Mead in the American Southwest, and uncovered several sets of human remains in what was once water. At least one body, one found in a barrel, featured a gunshot wound. A dry riverbed choked up the dead, and the land became retribution. When I read about this gruesome discovery, I thought to myself, of course, how American. Which is really sad, to live in a culture so immature, so childish, that the crack in the sky is always a gunshot. That to be an American man is to aspire to be a made-up character, a penny novel cartoon, and therefore to become a real-life gunslinger. The literal translation. Don't you think the men of a mature adult nation should be a little more nuanced and a little more self-aware than that? And a little less interested in lethal cosplay? And so, in the hope that America learns some nuance and comes to understand the fiction in myth and the art of metaphor, hopefully before the coming election, although I'm not holding my breath, this is John Tessitore concluding another installment of Be True. If you've listened this long, thank you. You can find all of my work, including All the Lonely American Roads, at johntessitore.com. But first, read, or reread, The Grapes of Wrath. It's really great. But this time, in place of Jode, insert the name Garcia and see what happens. I haven't done it yet, but I'm guessing the book becomes even more truthful. Special thanks to me for today's theme music, which I call A-Chord. Maybe we'll talk again, and if you enjoyed this little podcast, leave some stars or a review and tell your friends. In the meantime, I gotta feed the dog. All right, Luna, I'm coming.